Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons in Paris. Our guest today is one of the giants of post-war 20th century politics. He may never have been President of the United States, but as National Security Advisor under Richard Nixon and Secretary of State under successive administrations, Henry Kissinger has had a lasting impact on the conduct of American foreign policy. He pioneered the policy of détente towards the Soviet Union and China, and won the Nobel Peace Prize for his part in the attempts, albeit in vain, to negotiate an end to the Vietnam War, while the expression shuttle diplomacy was coined to describe his efforts to bring about peace in the Middle East following the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1973. Henry Kissinger, thanks very much for being the guest on our program.
Pleasure to be here.
It's a while since you last served as Secretary of State, but successive administrations have turned to you for advice on foreign policy. What advice would you be giving at the moment to this administration of Barack Obama on the situation in Afghanistan? He's being pulled in every direction at the moment, given different advice. What would your advice would be, especially given the fact that his commander-in-chief in Afghanistan at the moment is asking him to increase forces by a considerable amount?
I have published an article on the subject, so it's, feel free to talk about it. I think there are three separate issues. One, the level of forces. Second, the strategy to be pursued. Third, the diplomacy to be pursued. On the level of forces, he should take the advice of the commander that he appointed, the superior of that commander with whom he Obama, has cooperated, because there's no alternative number that he can come up with that won't have the same problems. If he does nothing, it will be taken as a sign of retreat. If he does a little, it will be taken as falling between all recommendations. Having taken, however, the decision to increase the forces, the strategy ought to be geared more precisely to the security of the population and to creating a base from which to operate. Third, we need a diplomacy that involves the countries whose national security interests is most directly involved, and that is not primarily the NATO nations, but countries like India, Pakistan, China, Russia, and even Iran.
Do you see any parallels with the situation in the Vietnam War and the problems, the complex issues facing the American administration then? Lack of faith in the national government, unclear war aims to a large extent, opposition to the war growing inside the United States? Or is that exaggerating things too much?
Well, the parallel is the potential opposition within the United States. And having gone through the Vietnam War, one has to face this fact. You cannot fight a war if a very large percentage of your population is determined to stop it.
Barack Obama faces problems all over the world at the moment, and within the United States as well, of course. But if I could just turn to the Middle East. Sometimes you must look at what's happening in the Middle East and think nothing changes at all. You ran into the barriers of intransigence in your time. Do you think Barack Obama is going to face the same sort of problems that you faced?
Well, I was lucky to be able to work with President Sadat in Egypt. And on that basis, we made 3 agreements, 2 with Egypt and 1 with Syria, in an 18-month period. But what my experience teaches me is that a lot depends on the quality of the governments that are involved in the process. And that is something that we have not yet seen the result of.
Barack Obama very much put his reputation on the line in a widely praise speech that he made in Cairo. He really has got to deliver on that, doesn't he? Otherwise, his reputation and the reputation of the United States is going to suffer in the Middle East.
But what our friends have to recognize too, here's the President of the United States who has put forward a message of conciliation, cooperation with allies, hand outstretched towards our adversaries. And if there is not a meaningful response for the American public, either from our allies or from our adversaries, it will damage the cause of everything that they have argued for. And that is an issue before the world right now.
You mentioned the fact that the American administration under President Obama has been extending a hand to its enemies, to the enemies of the United States. One of those, of course, is Iran. He's come in for quite a lot of criticism because of that. Do you think he's making a mistake?
No, he's right to offer a negotiation. Because if things become difficult, the president needs to be able to show to the American people and to the world that he has made every effort to avoid a crisis. So I support the fact of the negotiations. And we are at the very beginning, so it's too early to say.
You don't think there's a sense in which the Iranians are trying, at least, to take the United States for a ride?
Well, I would have to say certainly one strain in Iran is trying to do that. And it is surely a danger. But I would argue that if we conduct the negotiations thoughtfully, and if we don't keep them going just for negotiation's sake, then I think it is the right course. And it is a course that had to be taken.
And if results aren't achieved, what are the options?
Well, if results aren't achieved, then we and our allies have to decide whether to use sanctions. What we cannot afford is that the leading countries in the world and the so-called world community say that something is not acceptable, and then they accept it anyway, because it will weaken their impact in the world and on other problems if they can be so lightly disregarded.
The issue of sanctions, of course, and the potential success of sanctions will depend to a large extent on the support of Russia and China. Do you think that the United States is going to get in?
I think on Iran.
Yeah, on Iran, yeah.
The issue of non-proliferation or of proliferation affects other countries before it affects the United States. They're closer to Iran, they have fewer defensive capabilities and much fewer retaliatory capabilities. So, therefore one should hope that these other countries will take it seriously if a nuclear program, a weapons program in Iran appears imminent.
Do you think that there's a danger that Russia, in watching the way things are developing in international diplomacy at the moment, will think that the Americans are trying too hard to buy their friendship?
I can't say that the Americans are trying too hard. The danger is that that other countries think that we can think of no alternatives when the negotiations fail. It's appropriate that at the beginning of the negotiations we make clear that we are sincere, and it is necessary that we have a specific program. If we then stick to that program, and if we show also that we are imaginative about drawing the consequences from failure, but are also willing to back success, then I think the effort itself should not be criticized. results is what should be the subject of examination.
If I could just go off on a bit of a tangent at the moment. We're coming up to the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. What are your memories of that moment? Where were you and how did you feel?
I was in a very strange position on that day because I happened to be that day in China. And I happened that day to have a conversation with Deng Xiaoping about the coup in Romania that had just taken place. And the Chinese were warning me that that the East European communist system would not be able to stand putting glasnost before perestroika. And that's all I knew when I got on the airplane. And then when I landed in Hawaii, I learned that the wall had come down, which nobody had expected. And while I thought in an historic sense it would happen, I was stunned. And I then watched for a day on television from Hawaii the outpouring of one of the few genuine moments where people came across both sides of the dividing line into a common perception of the world.
And that, I'm afraid,
one of the great moments.
And that, I'm afraid,
remember Rostropovich coming with his cello to the...
That, I'm afraid, Henry Kissenger, is where we have to end the programme. Thanks very much for being our guest on The Interview. Please do join us again tomorrow for another edition of the programme. Goodbye.